I was cleaning the bedroom, the kind of deep cleaning I only did once in a while, when I noticed the clock on the nightstand was slightly tilted. It was just a small thing, barely noticeable, but something about it caught my attention. I picked it up, meaning to straighten it, but as I turned it over, I felt something shift inside. Curious, I opened the back panel, expecting perhaps a loose battery or a broken part. Instead, what I found made my blood run cold. Tucked inside, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it, was a small recording device. It was wired neatly into the frame of the clock, a tiny red light blinking softly in the dark space behind the cover. My hands began to tremble as I stared at it, unable to understand what I was looking at. My mind raced with questions I could not yet form. Was someone spying on us? But the more terrifying thought came next, uninvited and sharp. Who would have access to our bedroom clock? The answer was immediate and horrifying. My husband. A sense of betrayal crashed over me like a wave. I did not know it yet, but this discovery was only the beginning. When I first met Daniel, he was charming in a quiet, steady sort of way. He was not the kind of man who lit up a room or commanded attention, but there was something comforting about his presence. He listened carefully, spoke deliberately, and made me feel seen in a way I had never experienced before. Our relationship grew slowly, built on shared routines and small, thoughtful gestures. He brought me coffee in the mornings, remembered the names of my coworkers, and never forgot a birthday or anniversary. I used to believe that was love, the comfort of someone who always showed up, always remembered. We settled into married life with an ease that I thought was rare. We were not the couple that posted every moment online or took extravagant vacations, but we had our rituals. Friday night takeout and old movies, Sunday morning walks to the bakery, quiet evenings spent reading side by side. From the outside, our life must have looked ideal, calm, stable, predictable. Even to me, most of the time, it felt like something close to happiness. I worked part-time at a local art studio, Daniel worked in tech from home, and we gave each other space. It seemed balanced. But even in those early years, there were moments I dismissed, little signs that did not fit with the image I had created. Daniel had a way of asking questions that felt slightly too precise, where I was going, who I would be with, when I expected to be back. At first, I told myself it was endearing, that he cared deeply. But the questions never really stopped, and they were rarely casual. They came with a kind of watchfulness, like he was always taking mental notes. There were other things, too. He disliked surprises, even small ones. Once, I came home early from work and found him sitting in the kitchen looking startled, almost angry. He asked if everything was all right, but his tone was tight, controlled. Another time, I went to visit my sister for a weekend, and when I returned, he had rearranged parts of the house, not dramatically, but enough to make me feel unsettled. He said he just wanted to be helpful, that he thought it would make things more efficient. I said nothing, though something about it stayed with me. Still, I convinced myself these were quirks, not warnings. Every relationship has its oddities, and I did not want to be the kind of person who turned small things into big ones. He was dependable, responsible, and never raised his voice. That counted for something, did it not? We had dinner together most nights. Daniel liked structure. He liked the lights off by a certain time, the dishwasher loaded in a specific way, the thermostat set to the same temperature every evening. At times, I felt like I was moving through someone else's carefully crafted routine, but it was easier to go along with it. He always thanked me for dinner. He always said good night. In our bedroom, everything had its place. Daniel had once said that our home should be a sanctuary, free from chaos. I agreed. I had grown up in a loud and messy household, so the quiet order of our life felt like a relief. I did not question why I often felt like I was tiptoeing around that order. I just told myself I was being respectful. There were no explosive fights between us. If anything, there was a kind of silence that grew heavier over time. We talked about bills, about errands, about practical things. We did not argue, but we also did not talk about the deeper things anymore. Dreams, fears, hopes. I began to feel that I was living beside someone rather than with them. Daniel had a habit of checking the locks every night, twice, sometimes 3 times. He would walk through the house, testing each one, even the windows. He said it made him feel secure, and I never questioned it. But sometimes, I would wake up and find him already out of bed, standing by the hallway closet or sitting on the couch in the dark, staring ahead as if he had been deep in thought. When I asked if he was all right, he always said he was just restless. I did not press him. Looking back, I realize how much I trained myself not to press him. I was always trying to avoid upsetting the delicate balance of our life together. If he seemed distant, I told myself he was tired. If he became quiet, I assumed he was simply thinking. If he questioned me, I told myself it was love disguised as concern. We had no children, by choice. Daniel said he was not sure he could ever be a good father, and I said I understood. It made our home quieter, emptier, sometimes too quiet. I began to fill the silence with small projects, redecorating, painting, gardening. He never objected, but he rarely participated either. He watched from the sidelines, nodding, always aware. Friends would ask how we were doing, and I always smiled and said we were doing well. And in many ways, we were. There was no chaos, no fighting, no betrayal, at least none that I knew of. But there was something else, something unspoken that sat between us. I just did not know how to name it. Then the clock shifted on the nightstand, and everything began to unravel. It started with something small, as it often does. One morning, I noticed Daniel was already awake and fully dressed when I came downstairs. It was not a work day, and normally he liked to sleep in. He was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, but he looked unsettled. I asked if everything was all right, and he smiled, but it was strained, like he was trying to appear calm. He said he could not sleep and had some things on his mind. When I asked what those things were, he changed the subject to something mundane, like the water bill or whether I had remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. That moment passed, but it left a strange feeling in my chest. The next day, I noticed he was checking his phone constantly. Daniel had never been glued to his phone before. In fact, he often criticized people who could not go 5 minutes without scrolling through something. But now, he was unlocking it every few minutes, typing rapidly, then locking it again. When I asked if something was going on at work, he said no and quickly put the phone face down on the table. It felt like a barrier, a way to shut me out of something I had not been invited into. Later that week, he asked me a strange question while we were getting ready for bed. He wanted to know exactly what time I had gotten home that afternoon. I told him it was around 4, maybe a little later. He nodded, then asked if I had gone straight upstairs or if I had stopped in the kitchen first. I laughed and asked why he was interrogating me. He said it was just curiosity, nothing more. But there was something in his eyes, a sharpness I had not seen before, and it made me uneasy. These odd little moments began to pile up. Daniel seemed more alert, more guarded. He locked his home office now, even when he was just stepping out for a short break. He had never done that before. One afternoon, I passed by the door and heard what sounded like a recording playing. When I knocked, he turned it off so quickly I thought I had imagined it. He opened the door and acted completely normal, asking if I wanted tea. I stood there staring at him, wondering why I felt like a stranger in my own home. Around that time, I had lunch with my friend Melissa. We met at our usual spot, a small cafe not far from the studio. She noticed immediately that something was off with me and asked what was wrong. I hesitated, unsure if I was making too much of things. But I told her anyway. I explained the odd behavior, the sudden questions, the secretive attitude. She listened carefully, then leaned in and said something that stuck with me. She said it sounded like Daniel was watching me, not just observing, but truly watching, like he was trying to catch something. I laughed it off, told her that was too dramatic. But her words settled somewhere deep in my mind and refused to leave. After that conversation, I began to notice more things. My phone, which I usually left on the kitchen counter, had been moved slightly when I returned from the studio. The apps were all in place, but I had the nagging sense that someone had gone through it. My laptop, too, seemed to start up more slowly than usual, like it had been accessed recently. I changed all my passwords, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I tried to talk to Daniel again. I asked if he was worried about something, if there was anything he wanted to talk about. He assured me everything was fine, but his words felt rehearsed. He held me a little too tightly that night, whispered that he loved me more than anything. Instead of feeling reassured, I felt like I was being calmed before something terrible was about to happen. The final push came one morning while I was tidying up. I was dusting the bedroom, going through our usual space, when I noticed the clock on the nightstand was not quite right. It was a small, sleek digital clock we had owned for years, but now it looked different. Slightly off-center. I picked it up to straighten it, and that was when I felt the shift inside. Something clicked in my mind. I remembered Daniel checking the clock the other day, tapping it lightly with his fingers, then adjusting it like it had to be in a perfect spot. I had assumed it was part of his routine. But now, it felt more deliberate. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the clock in my hands. My heart was racing. I turned it over slowly, opened the back panel, and found the recording device tucked neatly inside. It was not just a random piece of tech, it was wired directly into the clock's body, hidden behind a panel I never would have thought to open unless I had been searching. I sat frozen, staring at it. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands were shaking. I had suspected something was wrong, but this was something else entirely. This was proof. Proof that someone had been recording us. Recording me. And there was only one person who could have planted it. I placed the clock back gently, trying to keep my hands from trembling too much. I could not confront him yet. I needed time to think. I needed to be sure. I needed to know what else he might have hidden. That night, I lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to the sound of his breathing, wondering how many nights he had listened to mine through a device I never knew was there. My fingers trembled as I held the clock in my hands, staring at the small panel I had just opened. Nestled inside was something I could not immediately comprehend. It looked like a tiny circuit board with a few wires running across it. At first, I tried to convince myself it was part of the clock's internal mechanism, maybe something to regulate the alarm or sync the time. But as I leaned closer, I saw the unmistakable shape of a small microphone, perfectly positioned to capture sound from within the room. A chill ran down my spine. I set the clock on the nightstand, but I could not bring myself to look away from it. I picked it up again and turned it over in my hands, hoping, praying that I was wrong. I opened the back more carefully this time, gently easing the plastic flap aside. My heart pounded in my chest. Tucked beneath the ordinary battery compartment, hidden so well I had missed it before, was a small memory card. It was barely the size of my fingertip, but its presence confirmed everything. This was not some clock malfunction. This was a recording device. I sat back on the bed, gripping the edge tightly to steady myself. My stomach churned. My thoughts raced. The silence in the room felt deafening. I could hear the ticking of the larger wall clock and the faint hum of the heater, but it all felt far away, like I was underwater. I stared at the memory card, wondering what it held. My hands moved almost on their own as I pulled out my laptop and inserted the card using an adapter. My breath caught in my throat when the folder appeared instantly. Dozens of audio files were arranged by date and time. The oldest one was nearly 4 months old. I felt my vision blur as tears welled in my eyes. 4 months. For that long, someone had been listening to us, to me, without my knowledge or consent. I clicked on one of the files at random. My voice filled the speakers. I was talking to myself, humming a tune, moving about the bedroom as I folded laundry. It was an ordinary moment, but hearing it from that perspective made it feel grotesque. I sounded exposed. Vulnerable. I clicked another file, and there we were, Daniel and I, talking late at night about his job, about a documentary we had watched. The intimacy of it made my skin crawl. These were moments meant to stay between us. Instead, they had been harvested, recorded, stored. I slammed the laptop shut and dropped it onto the bed. I felt like I could not breathe. My chest was tight, my skin prickled with heat and dread. I stared at the clock again, now seeing it as something alien, invasive, a threat. The room that had once been my refuge now felt like a cage. I stood up and began pacing. 100 questions filled my mind, each more disturbing than the last. Why had he done this? What was he hoping to hear? Was he suspicious of me, or was he simply obsessed with control? I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. Maybe he had been testing a new gadget, or maybe he was trying to catch someone else in the act of theft or wrongdoing. But those explanations felt thin, desperate. The reality was that Daniel had placed that device there with intention. He had opened up the back of the clock, installed the recorder, concealed it so perfectly I would never have noticed if not for a sudden burst of suspicion. And he had done it all without saying a word to me. No explanation. No warning. Just silence and secrets. I walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked pale, my eyes wide and unfocused. I tried to calm myself, to breathe deeply, to think logically. But the betrayal sat heavy in my chest. I felt like something had cracked open inside me, like the foundation of my life had shifted beneath my feet. I returned to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed once more. I picked up the clock again, studying it carefully. I began to think back to moments when Daniel had looked at it, adjusted it, even moved it slightly from time to time. There had been a day when he had asked if we should get a new one, saying this one looked old-fashioned. I had told him it worked just fine. He had laughed and agreed, but now I wondered if that suggestion had been a cover, a way to distract me while he made changes. I turned the device over again, examining the small screws, the hidden compartment. I realized how easy it would have been to miss it. The craftsmanship was subtle, almost professional. This was not some cheap recorder bought from a novelty store. This was deliberate. In my shock, I found myself slipping into denial. Maybe he had told me about it and I had forgotten. Maybe I had agreed to it at some point, like for a social experiment or a project. But that thought collapsed almost immediately. I would never have agreed to something like this. Not in our bedroom. Not without knowing exactly what it was for. I remembered something else then, a night weeks ago when I had felt uneasy before bed. Daniel had asked me strange questions about my routines, about what I did when he was not around. At the time, I had chalked it up to stress or curiosity. But now it all connected. He had been studying me, not with affection or trust, but with suspicion. A wave of heartache washed over me. I had loved this man. I had trusted him with every piece of my life. And now, I sat in our bedroom, listening to recordings he had made of my most private moments. The violation felt complete, total. It was not just about the clock or the device. It was about the fact that he had looked at me every day, knowing what he had done, and had said nothing. I did not know what to do next. My body felt heavy, my thoughts scattered. But I knew I could not pretend anymore. The truth was out, and it was not going back into the shadows. Whether I was ready or not, I had to confront it. The man I loved had been hiding in plain sight, and now I had seen what he had tried so hard to keep hidden. I sat with the truth for 2 days before I found the strength to say anything. During that time, I moved through the house like a ghost. I still cooked meals, answered questions, responded to texts, but I felt like I was watching someone else live my life. Every moment I spent near Daniel made my skin crawl, yet I also found myself studying him, watching his expressions, listening to the way he spoke to me. I kept wondering how I had missed it. How had I not seen what he was capable of? I barely slept those nights. I kept hearing my own voice from those recordings. My laughter. My sighs. Every sound I had made in that bedroom had been captured and preserved without my knowledge. The room that had once been a place of comfort now felt like a stage. I could not keep pretending. I had to confront him. I needed to hear his voice crack under the weight of a lie or the chill of guilt. I needed him to know that I knew. That evening, as we sat in the living room watching television, I looked over at him. He seemed relaxed, content, unaware that the mask he had worn for months had finally slipped. I turned off the television and stood in front of him. He looked up at me with surprise. I asked him directly, plainly, where he got the recording device in the bedroom clock. For a moment, his face froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Then, like a switch had flipped, he laughed. It was not a joyful laugh. It was awkward and forced. He asked me what I was talking about. I repeated myself, slower this time. I described the device, the memory card, the dates on the files, the sound of my own voice. His smile faded. He stared at me, then stood up, and suddenly I could see it all. His panic, his shame, and something else. Something darker. He asked why I was going through the clock. He said it was not mine to mess with. I blinked at him, stunned. That was his first response. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just blame. He said I had no right to dig through his things. I asked him why he had placed a listening device in our bedroom. I asked him how long he had been recording me. I asked what he had hoped to find. He raised his voice and accused me of overreacting. He said it was nothing. He called it a safety precaution, claimed he had heard a noise once when I was home alone and wanted to make sure everything was fine. He said the recordings were never used for anything and that I was turning a small mistake into something massive. I felt my hands ball into fists. I reminded him that there had been no discussion. He had not asked. He had not even hinted. I told him this was a violation of my privacy, of my trust. He shrugged and told me I was being dramatic. He said he did not understand why I was so upset when I had nothing to hide. That sentence hit me like a slap. Nothing to hide. As though that justified everything. As though I had given up my right to privacy simply by existing in our shared home. I told him it was not about hiding anything. It was about respect. It was about feeling safe in my own space. He kept twisting my words, saying things like, if I really loved him, I would understand, or maybe I was just guilty about something and that was why I was reacting this way. I felt the heat rise in my chest. I told him I was not guilty of anything except trusting a man who clearly did not trust me. He scoffed, turned away, and said I was being paranoid. He accused me of being emotional, irrational. I saw the tactics for what they were. He was trying to gaslight me. He wanted me to question my reaction, to doubt what I knew, to shift the focus away from what he had done. But I stood my ground. I told him plainly that he had betrayed me. I told him that I had listened to those recordings, and that hearing myself unaware and exposed had broken something inside me. I told him that no matter what excuse he came up with, it did not erase the fact that he had invaded my privacy in the place where I should have felt the safest. His face changed then. The defensiveness drained away for a second, replaced by something softer. He looked tired. He sat down and buried his face in his hands. He muttered that he had made a mistake, that he was under stress, that he was scared I was slipping away, that he thought I was hiding something because I had been quieter, more distant. He said he did not know how to talk to me anymore. I stood in silence. I heard his words, but they did not reach me. I had spent so long trying to be open, to share, to build something real with him. And when he had felt uncertainty, instead of speaking to me, instead of asking, he had turned to surveillance. He had chosen suspicion over conversation, control over vulnerability. He looked up at me, eyes pleading, asking if I could forgive him. I saw the man I had once loved, but I also saw the one who had hidden a recorder inside a bedroom clock. The two were no longer the same. I told him I needed space. I could not stay in the house that night. I grabbed a bag and packed a few things. He followed me to the door, asking where I was going, asking me to stay and talk more. I did not answer. I walked away from the house with my heart in pieces, knowing something had shifted permanently. The confrontation had not brought healing. It had revealed the depths of the damage. Something vital between us had broken, and no apology could glue it back together. Not this time. I spent the night at my sister's place. She did not ask many questions, just offered me a quiet room, a hot cup of tea, and the space to breathe. I stared at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep, my mind racing in loops. The confrontation with Daniel had not brought closure. If anything, it left behind a tangled mess of confusion and heartbreak. He had admitted to recording me, but had hidden behind half-truths and flimsy excuses. I needed real answers. I needed to know who I had married. The next morning, I returned to the house when I was sure he would be at work. I had a key, and I walked in slowly, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The silence wrapped around me as I moved through each room. I did not have a clear plan, but I knew I was not leaving without understanding what had happened. I needed more than his shallow justification. I needed to understand why. I began in the bedroom. I examined the clock again, studying it carefully, almost as if hoping it would whisper the truth. Then I opened his closet. I pulled out boxes, files, anything I could find. Most of it was ordinary, tax documents, warranties, old receipts. But one folder caught my attention. It was tucked behind a stack of magazines, barely visible. Inside, I found printouts of text messages. Not mine. Conversations between me and friends, me and my sister, even emails I had sent from my private account. I felt my stomach turn as I realized how deep this went. This was not just about the bedroom. This was not just one device. He had been watching more than I had known. In the bottom of the folder was a small journal. Daniel's handwriting filled the pages, sharp and angry. I sat down on the bed and started reading. He had started writing a year ago. His words were scattered, disjointed, and emotional. Page after page spoke of his fear that I was lying to him. He wrote about feeling invisible, like I was drifting away. He mentioned small things, me staying late at work, me texting someone and smiling, me locking my phone. Each instance, in his eyes, became evidence. He had convinced himself I was hiding something. There was one entry that stopped me cold. He wrote that he had followed me once, that he had seen me meet someone at a cafe and laugh too loudly, that he had convinced himself that this man was more than a friend. The entry ended with his resolution to find the truth, to record everything, to gather proof before confronting me. But I had never cheated. The man at the cafe was my coworker, and we were discussing a project deadline. There had been nothing romantic, nothing secretive. As I turned the pages, the paranoia deepened. He was not just suspicious. He was obsessed. He tracked my mood swings, the way I folded my laundry, the nights I was too tired for intimacy. Every detail of our life had become part of his private investigation. I could see now that the recording device had been the most visible symptom of something that had been growing for a long time. When I confronted him again that evening, I brought the folder with me. He looked shocked when he saw it in my hands, but then he deflated, like he had been holding his breath for months and finally exhaled. He did not deny anything this time. He sat down, silent for a long moment, and then began to speak. He told me that years ago, before he met me, he had been in a relationship with someone who had betrayed him deeply. He had been engaged. She had cheated with someone he had known for years, someone he had trusted. He said it broke him, that it made him feel like he had no control. He told me that ever since, he had struggled with trust, even when nothing was wrong. He thought he had moved past it, but as our relationship deepened, the fear returned. He was afraid of losing me. He was afraid of being blindsided again. And instead of dealing with that fear, he tried to control it. I listened, numb, as he poured out this history. I heard the pain in his voice, the regret. He told me he had never meant to hurt me. He said he did not realize how far he had gone until it was too late. He told me he loved me. He told me he just wanted to feel safe. But nothing he said made the violation any less real. I asked him why he had never told me this before. Why he had not opened up, why he had not trusted me with his story. He said he was ashamed. That he thought if he brought up the past, I would see him as weak, or paranoid, or broken. He thought he could manage it on his own. Instead, he let that fear grow in secret, until it poisoned everything. I asked him if he had considered therapy. He looked down and admitted that he had, but he never followed through. He said he did not want to believe he needed it. He thought he could watch me closely enough, control things tightly enough, that the fear would go away. But it never did. I sat there, staring at this man I thought I knew. I remembered all the times he had held me close, all the late-night talks, the shared laughter, the promises whispered in the dark. I had believed we were building something unshakable. Now I saw that while I was building trust, he had been building walls. His truth did not erase the damage, but it explained the shape of it. It painted a picture of someone who had been hurt deeply and had never healed. Someone who had carried that wound into our marriage and allowed it to dictate his actions. I felt a complicated mix of anger and sorrow. He was not a monster. He was a man afraid of losing love, but he had chosen control over connection, and in doing so, had created the very outcome he feared. He asked if I could forgive him. He asked if we could rebuild. I looked at him and told him I did not know. I told him that love was not enough when it was buried under secrets and surveillance. I told him that I needed time, and that he needed help. Real help. Not just words, not just regrets. I could not promise anything until I saw that he was willing to face the damage he had caused, not just to me, but to himself. That night, I left again. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a place where trust had been broken and truths had been buried too long. But as I walked away, I no longer carried just confusion. I carried clarity. The truth was ugly, but it was real. And sometimes, even painful truth is better than the most comforting lie. I moved into a small furnished apartment 2 neighborhoods away from our old home. I did not tell Daniel exactly where I was staying. I needed distance, not only from him but from the place where I had begun to feel like I was always being watched. My sister helped me pack what I needed. We did it quietly, quickly, without making a scene. Daniel had agreed to give me space, and for the first time in weeks, he actually followed through on his word. He did not call. He did not text. He disappeared, and somehow, that silence brought more relief than anything he could have said. In the days that followed, I felt like I was learning how to live again. At first, everything felt foreign. I kept checking behind the curtains and unplugging electronics. I hesitated before speaking aloud, even when I was alone. The fear had not left me. It had just taken a different form. I had internalized it, absorbed it into my body like a second skin. It took real effort to trust the space around me again, to believe that my thoughts were my own and not being recorded, studied, and dissected. I found a therapist 3 weeks after I left. Her name was Alina. She was calm, attentive, and never rushed me. I sat in her office with its soft lighting and comfortable chairs and slowly began to unravel everything that had happened. I told her about the device, the confrontation, the folder filled with evidence, the journal that read more like a manifesto. I told her about the way Daniel had justified it all with his fear, and how I had found myself almost sympathizing with him, even as I was falling apart. Alina told me something that stayed with me. She said that love and control cannot exist in the same space. One always suffocates the other. And even if his intentions came from a place of fear, the outcome had been a violation that I could not and should not minimize. Healing, she said, would mean recognizing that his past pain did not give him the right to cause new pain. It did not make his actions acceptable. It only made them human, and even humans must face consequences. I also spoke with a lawyer. I did not know if I wanted a divorce yet, but I needed to understand my rights. The conversation was practical, unemotional, but necessary. She confirmed that placing a recording device in a shared private space without consent could be grounds for legal action. She told me that if I chose to press charges or file a restraining order, I would be within my rights. I did not make any decisions that day, but I walked away feeling stronger, knowing that the law saw what had happened as a serious breach, not just a misunderstanding between spouses. I joined a support group for survivors of emotional abuse. At first, I was hesitant. I did not think I belonged there. Daniel had never hit me. He had never raised his voice much before the confrontation. But as I listened to the stories of others, people who had been gaslight, controlled, manipulated in quiet ways, I saw pieces of myself in them. I learned that abuse does not always leave bruises. Sometimes, it leaves you doubting your own mind. Sometimes, it strips you of your sense of self without ever raising a hand. Through these sessions, I began to see how deeply I had been affected. I had become used to shrinking parts of myself to keep the peace. I had gotten used to walking on eggshells when Daniel seemed tense, to downplaying my feelings to avoid conflict. I remembered how often he asked me where I was going, what I was doing, who I was texting. I had explained it away as care, as love, but now I saw it for what it was, control. He had built a cage out of concern, and I had locked myself inside it, not realizing what it was until it was too late. One evening, I opened my laptop and wrote a long letter to Daniel. I did not send it. It was not for him. It was for me. I wrote down everything I wanted to say, everything I had held in. I told him how his actions had broken my trust, how they had made me question every kind word, every moment of intimacy. I told him that love without respect is not love. I told him that I had loved him truly, but I would not sacrifice my peace of mind to make him feel secure. I wrote until my fingers ached, and then I closed the document and let it sit there, like a sealed confession. Months passed. The seasons changed. I stopped checking over my shoulder. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I redecorated the apartment, bought small things that made me feel grounded. Plants, soft blankets, candles with familiar scents. I learned to enjoy silence again. I filled it with books, music, the sound of my own breathing. Daniel did reach out eventually. He sent a letter. In it, he said he had started therapy. He said he was working through his trust issues. He apologized, not in vague terms, but with clarity. He said he understood if I never came back. He just wanted me to know that he was sorry. I read it once and then put it away. I did not write back. I was not ready, and I was no longer trying to save him. I was saving myself now. One night, I stood by my window and looked out at the streetlights glowing softly in the distance. I realized I had not thought about the clock in days. The image of it no longer haunted me. It had been the beginning of my unraveling, yes, but also the beginning of my return to myself. I had spent so long trying to be a good wife, a supportive partner, someone who forgave easily and understood deeply. But now, I was learning to be a good guardian of my own boundaries. I was learning to protect my space, my voice, my worth. I had been violated in a place that should have been safe, and yet, here I was, still standing, still breathing, still rebuilding. Privacy is not a luxury. It is not optional. It is essential. And trust is not a gift we give blindly. It is something earned, something nurtured, something sacred. I had trusted Daniel, and he had broken that trust not with a single act, but with a pattern of choices that left me feeling exposed and unseen. But I see myself now. I see the woman who walked away, not because she stopped loving, but because she started loving herself more. I see the strength it took to leave, the courage it took to heal, and the wisdom that grew from pain. I do not know what the future holds, but I know one thing with absolute certainty. My peace is not up for compromise. Not now. Not ever again.